Hello, this is David and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm coming to you with a review of The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunsany. This is a classic fantasy novel that was written in the 1920s. This is part of the Appendix N challenge, so this is one that Jeremy Fee opened up probably about a month ago. I'll have that linked down below. But basically, the premise is you take the 28 or so authors of classic science fiction and fantasy that helped influence Dungeons and Dragons in its creation, and you read at least one book by each of them. Book or story is what he said, but in my book, it's books, unless they only wrote short stories. So the first one to kick that off, I picked up my copy of Lord Dunsany, The King of Elfland's Daughter. It had been sitting on my shelf. I had actually started reading it back at the very tail end of April, so I was about 30 pages in and just picked it up and took it from there. My copy here has, looks like about 160 pages. I mean, these are taller than standard, so it's not a trade paperback size, but I mean, it's a very full, dense in terms of the words on there, no pictures or images or anything like that. It was quite a bit of a read. So I'm going to start by just reading the first page to you, and then I'm going to talk about my thoughts, and then we'll wrap up from there. So it kicks off with the plan of the Parliament of Earl. In the ruddy jackets of leather that reached to their knees, the men of Earl appeared before their lord, the stately white-haired man in his long red room. He leaned in his carven chair and heard their spokesman. And thus their spokesman said, "For 700 years the chiefs of your race have ruled us well, and their deeds are remembered by the minor minstrels, living on yet in their little tinkling songs. And yet the generations dream away, and there is no new thing." "What would you?" said the Lord. "We would be ruled by a magic lord," they said. "So be it," said the Lord. "It is 500 years since my people have spoken thus in Parliament, and it shall always be as your Parliament saith. You have spoken, so be it." And he raised his hand and blessed them, and they went. They went back to their ancient crafts, to the fitting of iron, to the hooves of horses, to working upon leather, to tending flowers, to ministering to the rugged needs of the earth. They followed the ancient ways and looked for new things, but the old lord sent a word to his eldest son, bidding him come before him. And very soon the young man stood before him in that same carven chair from which he had not moved, where light, growing late, from high windows showed the aged eyes looking far into the future beyond the old lord's time. And seated there he gave his son this commandment. "Go forth," he said, "before these days of mine are over, and therefore go in haste, and go from here eastwards, and past the fields we know, till you see the lands that clearly pertain to Fairy, and cross their boundary, which is made of twilight, and come to the place that is told of only in song." So, Lord Dunsany was one of many influences that were placed on J.R.R. Tolkien, and one of the first things I noticed when I was reading this book is just how much influence he might have had. The readability of this is going to feel like reading The Lord of the Rings in terms of the depth of description and the pacing and everything like that. I mean, it's just dense with good, vibrant prose. It's got interesting characters. It's got good descriptions in there. It never gets bogged down on any of that, but it just is a slow read because it is just so packed with good information in there that it was not a quick and breezy read like you would expect a 162-page book to be. It took me quite some time to get through it, and it wasn't through any issues I was having with reading the book, but rather it's just so much that I was always taking something in on reading it. Now, this book follows the story of a couple of main characters. The young man that we saw at the very beginning here, who's told to go off to those lands. It also features the King of Elfland's Daughter, as you might suggest, or might assume from the title. The King of Elfland is a pretty big influence on the story. The young man who starts the book ends up having a son who also plays a big part. There's unicorns, there's trolls, there's will-o'-the-wisps, there's all kinds of magical enchantment embedded throughout, which is pretty interesting and fun to see. And it just follows a really specific problem that comes up, brought about by the King of Elfland and his daughter. It's got an interesting dynamic with the daughter. She doesn't get a lot of on-page time, but when she does, she's very much an active participant in the story, which is always a good thing to see. Back in the 1920s, that might not have always been the case. It was a really enjoyable read. I had fun with it. I'm glad I read it. I wish it had just a little bit better pacing to it. But it's got a really good depth, some vibrant descriptions. It's got a good and satisfying resolution. It's got some minor storylines that you'll be following throughout there that, as you hit them, will feel like, oh man, this isn't where I want to be in the story, but they all come together really well and nicely towards the end. The chapters are, in general, really short, only 2, 3, 4 pages long. So it was an easy one to pick up, read a chapter, and then put it back down. There's a lot of chapters in that book. So yeah, I really enjoyed my first taste of Lord Dunsany, and there was a particular scene towards the end that really stood out to me with just the way something was phrased, a concept, and I think that you might appreciate it, and it's something that I wanted to just read here and share. So basically, at this point in time, some townspeople are coming to a witch and saying that they, instead of wishing to have magic be a part of their world, they want a world without magic. And so this is her response. No spell indeed, she hissed. No spell indeed, by broom and stars and night writing. Would you rob earth of her heirloom that has come from the olden time? Would you take her treasure and leave her bare to the scorn of her comrade planets? Poor indeed were we without magic, whereof we are well stored to the envy of darkness and space. She leaned forward from where she sat and stamped her stick, looking up in Gnarl's face with her fierce, unwavering eyes. I would sooner, she said, give you a spell against water, that all the world should thirst, than give you a spell against the song of streams that evening hears faintly over the ridge of a hill, too dim for wakeful ears, a song threading through dreams, whereby we learn of old wars and lost loves of the spirits of rivers. I would sooner give you a spell against bread, that all the world should starve, than give you a spell against the magic of wheat that haunts the golden hollows in moonlight in July, through which in the warm short nights wander how many of you whom man knows nothing. I would make you spells against comfort and clothing, food, shelter, and warmth. Aye, and will do it, sooner than tear from these poor fields of earth that magic, that it was so to them an ample cloak against the chill of space, and a gay raiment against the sneers of nothingness. Go hence, to your village go, and you that sought for magic in your youth but desire it not in your age, know that there is a blindness of spirit which comes from age, more black than the blindness of eye, making a darkness about you across which nothing may be seen, or felt, or known, or in any way apprehended, and no voice out of that darkness shall conjure me to grant a spell against magic. Hence. And when reading that particular part in the book, it reminded me so much of some of the thoughts of J.R.R. Tolkien that he expresses in his essay on fairy stories, where he basically defends the importance of fairy tale stories, the stories that become now considered more modern fantasy, that these stories are not, in fact, intended only for children, but are really vital pieces of the literary works that can be enjoyed far beyond childhood and should be enjoyed by more than just children. Um, so yeah, that passage really struck me as Tolkien-like in its descriptor, and that was yet another indicator that Dunsany was very much an influence on Tolkien. Now I don't know enough to know whether or not the two were ever acquainted formally or had corresponded or anything, but it wouldn't surprise me to know, since they were both living around the same time frame, that they were influences and knew each other at some point in time. But all in all, I really did enjoy The King of Elfland's Daughter. I'm so glad I read it. It was my first venture into Lord Dunsany. Um, I have a hard time placing a rating on this one. I'd probably go with a 4-star rating on it. It's one that I'd gladly read again. I want to read more by him. Um, and I don't know how soon I'll be able to do that, but I'm hoping to pass this book on to somebody so that they can enjoy it as well. And I'll pick up a bigger, more complete volume of Lord Dunsany's works, because I'm really excited to dive more into what else he has to write about. And I'm excited to continue this Appendix N challenge with Rogers Lasney, and I've got Edgar Rice Burroughs, a whole bunch of him sitting back behind me, to where I need to just start diving into some of them. So thank you so much for watching. I've got a couple more reviews here in the pipeline. I'm going to make it a point to try to review each and every book I finish this month and see how that goes as a test run for the month, and to see what you think, what you like. Do you like this, or would you prefer more of a monthly wrap up at the end where I just give brief thoughts on everything that I read instead of giving a specific book its full detailed time in the spotlight? So thank you.